June 2nd, 2007. She walked into a Target store to buy a simple gift for her boyfriend. 90 minutes later, her car was found abandoned, the keys shoved under the seat, the present still inside. What happened next, captured in chilling surveillance footage, would turn a normal shopping trip into one of the most haunting crimes in recent American history: the disappearance of Kelsey Smith. Kelsey Ann Smith was the kind of girl everyone seemed to love. Born May 3rd, 1989, she grew up in Johnson County with her parents Greg and Missy and 4 siblings. Friends knew her as funny, outgoing, and full of life. She played the clarinet in her high school marching band, worked at the local AMC movie theater, and had just graduated Shawn Mission West High School. She had her whole life ahead of her. College in the fall, plans to become a veterinarian, and a boyfriend she adored. At 18, Kelsey was standing at the edge of adulthood, ready to step into her future. But fate had other plans. June 2nd, 2007. Overland Park, Kansas. It was an ordinary Saturday. Kelsey worked her usual shift at the theater. Nothing unusual. Later, she met her dad Greg, a police officer, and her sister Lindsay, and they all went to an amusement park. It was a carefree day, the kind you remember for a lifetime. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, everything began to change. At 6 p.m., Kelsey told her dad she was heading to Target. Kelsey told her family she wanted to go shopping. She asked her sister to come along, but Lindsay declined. She wanted to buy a gift for her boyfriend, John. So Kelsey, ever independent, drove off alone to the local Target store. Before she left, she hugged her father and told him she loved him. Greg, who had taught all his children basic self-defense and safety awareness, never imagined it would be the last time he'd see his daughter alive. Around 7 p.m., Kelsey called her mom, Missy, who was driving home from a wedding. They spoke briefly, just the casual conversation of a daughter shopping and a mom on the road. They agreed to meet at home later. But later never came. When her boyfriend John stopped by the Smith home that evening, he expected to see Kelsey. Instead, she wasn't there. He tried calling her. No answer. He texted. Silence. Greg began calling too. Still nothing. And that's when alarm bells started ringing. Kelsey wasn't the kind of girl to vanish without notice. As minutes turned into hours, John and Lindsay couldn't sit still. They jumped in the car, determined to find her. They drove from parking lot to parking lot, scanning rows of vehicles for Kelsey's beige Buick. And then, there it was. But something wasn't right. Kelsey had told her dad she was going to Target, yet her car wasn't in the Target lot. It was parked near another store, in a dimly lit area that screamed danger. John approached the car. Inside, he saw the shopping bags, gift wrap, and a present Kelsey had bought for him, but no sign of Kelsey. Her keys were oddly shoved under the driver's seat, and sticking out of the trunk, a scrap of fabric, like a t-shirt, stuffed hastily inside. Greg, torn between his instincts as a cop and his dread as a father, told them not to touch anything. This was no accident. This was a crime scene. The Overland Park police arrived quickly. They scoured the car for evidence, but there were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No fingerprints they could link to family or friends. Just one unidentified thumbprint on the seatbelt. That fingerprint would later become a smoking gun. But for now, Kelsey had vanished without a trace. Her family's worst fears were becoming real. That night, detectives headed straight to Target. Maybe the surveillance cameras had answers. By the time they got inside, the store was closed. But an employee opened the doors and rolled back the footage. There was Kelsey, walking through the aisles, picking out wrapping paper and a gift. calm, ordinary, nothing out of place. She paid, bagged her items, and headed for the exit. Then came the chilling detail. She walked into the parking lot, loaded her bags into the back seat, and climbed into the driver's seat. Seconds later, her car rolled out of the lot, but instead of heading home, it drove in the opposite direction. The quality of the footage was poor, and investigators couldn't tell if Kelsey was at the wheel or if someone else had forced her to drive. What they did know was this: she had never made it home. At dawn, Greg and Missy sat across from detectives in a sterile interview room. As a cop, Greg knew what was happening. In every missing persons case, investigators start by ruling out the family. It was brutal, but necessary. The faster police eliminated them, the sooner they could focus on finding who really took Kelsey. Both parents answered every question. They had nothing to hide. And soon, suspicion turned towards someone else: Kelsey's boyfriend, John. John was brought in for hours of questioning. Investigators circled around him with the same questions, worded different ways, searching for cracks in his story. Was he hiding something? Did he and Kelsey fight? But John didn't break. He insisted he loved her. He opened his phone to police, surrendered everything. His grief was raw, his answers consistent. Detectives believed him, though they kept him on the list. Meanwhile, Greg couldn't sit idly by. He knew the clock was ticking. Every passing hour made it less likely Kelsey would be found alive. So he and Missy launched their own search. Flyers were printed. Volunteers canvassed neighborhoods. Greg pleaded on the radio. Soon, TV stations picked up the story, blasting Kelsey's picture across Kansas. Hundreds joined the search. Classmates went door to door, begging for leads. Hope was alive, but fragile. Because as much as the family prayed for Kelsey's safe return, Greg knew the dark truth every cop knows. Abductions rarely end well. Back at Target, detectives replayed the surveillance footage again and again, this time on sharper monitors. And then, something they had missed before. As Kelsey entered her car, a blurry shadow flashed into frame, just behind her, almost like someone lunging. The door slammed, and in just 15 seconds, her car pulled away. It was enough. Police were no longer dealing with a runaway. This was an abduction, and whoever did it was still out there. The grainy surveillance footage revealed the truth no parent ever wants to face. Kelsey hadn't left Target alone. She had been taken. Detectives replayed the footage again, slower, frame by frame. That's when they saw him. A man in a white t-shirt and dark shorts. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't browsing. He was hunting. Everywhere Kelsey went, he followed. Not too close, not enough for her to notice, but always there. When she stopped, he lingered. When she walked, he trailed, and as she headed to checkout, he slipped out the door, waiting for her in the parking lot. It was now undeniable. This man was the predator. The images were released to the public. Police asked for help. The phones exploded. More than 1,000 tips poured in. Was it a neighbor? A stranger? Someone they all passed every day? But every lead led nowhere. The blurry face in the grainy stills stayed just that, a phantom. Meanwhile, Greg and Missy were living in agony. Their daughter had been missing for days, and the hope of finding her alive was slipping away with each passing hour. Hundreds of volunteers combed neighborhoods. Flyers plastered across streetlights, gas stations, and shop windows. At night, Greg lay awake, replaying the same thought. If someone had her, every minute counted. But without a location, it felt hopeless. That's when investigators turned to Kelsey's phone. Her cell phone had pinged off a tower near Longview Lake, Missouri. about 15 miles from the Target store. Finally, a lead. Within hours, the FBI joined the case. A massive search party was launched. Nearly 200 people scoured the wooded area. Every branch, every patch of leaves, every shadow was inspected. And then, they found her. It had been 4 agonizing days. Under a blanket of leaves and branches, searchers uncovered Kelsey's body. She had been stripped, discarded like evidence, hidden beneath the forest floor. Her belongings lay scattered nearby. Her life stolen in the cruelest way. Forensic experts confirmed what investigators already feared. Kelsey had been strangled to death with her own belt. The scene revealed a horrific truth. The motive had been sexual. Her family's worst nightmare had come true. Police now knew they weren't just looking for a kidnapper. They were looking for a killer. And he was still out there. The urgency skyrocketed. If he had done this once, he could do it again. And next time, another innocent girl could vanish. Detectives combed through the Target footage again, not just for Kelsey, but for anyone else. And there it was. At 9:17 p.m., Kelsey's Buick was abandoned in the dark corner where it was later found. Minutes later, cameras picked up a man sprinting across the lot and jumping into a dark pickup truck. At 9:22, the truck sped off. Rewinding further, detectives saw that same truck enter the lot at 6:55 p.m., 1 minute before Kelsey drove in. She had unknowingly parked right next to her predator. What began as chance ended in tragedy. The photos of the pickup truck, along with the image of the man in the white t-shirt, were plastered everywhere. And this time, the calls that came in weren't just guesses. They were solid. 2 people called separately. One said he was a coworker, another a friend. Both gave the same name, Edwin Hall, a 26-year-old husband and father, owner of a blue pickup truck, a man with a dark past. Hall had no adult convictions, but as a teenager, he had a violent streak. At just 15 years old, he'd threatened his adoptive sister with a bread knife. He was no stranger to rage. And now, police believed he had graduated to murder. Officers raced to Hall's home. When they arrived, he was outside, hurriedly loading bags into his car, his wife and child nearby. He was preparing to leave, but he never got the chance. Police moved in and arrested him on the spot. Inside the interrogation room, Hall played dumb. He claimed he didn't even know who Kelsey Smith was, said he had nothing to do with her disappearance or her death. But detectives had already seen him on camera, trailing her through the aisles, waiting for her in the lot. When confronted, he cracked. He admitted he had noticed her because he liked her legs. But still, he denied everything else. It didn't matter because the fingerprint in Kelsey's car was about to expose him completely. The walls were closing in on Edwin Hall. Every denial, every excuse, every lie, shattered by one undeniable piece of evidence. That lone thumbprint found on Kelsey's seatbelt, it was his. The match was clear. There was no other explanation. Hall had been inside her car. He had touched her seatbelt. And now, there was nowhere left to run. When detectives laid the evidence in front of him, Hall broke. He confessed. He admitted that he had spotted Kelsey in the Target parking lot. He admitted following her through the aisles. And when she returned to her car, he pulled a gun and forced his way inside. From that moment, Kelsey's fate was sealed. Hall drove her to a remote wooded area outside the city. He ordered her to undress. Then, in a twisted attempt to erase his crime, he strangled her with her own belt. Afterward, he covered her body with leaves and branches and abandoned her car in a different lot, hoping to buy himself time. He thought he had been clever. He thought he had erased his trail. But one fingerprint was enough to unravel everything. On paper, Edwin Hall looked ordinary. A husband, a father, a man with a steady job. But beneath that mask was something darker. Someone capable of watching an innocent girl walk into a store and deciding she wouldn't walk out alive. For Kelsey's parents, Greg and Missy, the confession was both a relief and a devastation. They finally had answers. They finally knew what had happened. But nothing could bring their daughter home. The weight of that truth is unbearable. One day, your daughter is laughing with you at an amusement park. The next, you're standing in a morgue, identifying her body. No parent should ever have to live that nightmare. In September 2008, Hall stood before a jury. He was charged with capital murder, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated sexual assault. In court, he broke down. He apologized to Kelsey's family, said he was sorry, but his words meant nothing. The jury found him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would never walk free again. But for Greg and Missy Smith, justice wasn't enough. They had seen firsthand how slow the system could be. It had taken 4 days for Kelsey's cell phone company to release location data from her phone. 4 days of agony, 4 days of searching, 4 days too late. Because once police finally got the phone's location, they found Kelsey's body within just 45 minutes. That delay haunted her parents, and they refused to let it happen to anyone else. Out of unimaginable loss, they created a mission. Greg and Missy began pushing for a law that would allow law enforcement to access a missing person's cell phone location immediately, without waiting for a subpoena, without getting caught in red tape. They called it the Kelsey Smith Act. In 2009, Kansas passed it. Soon, more states followed. Today, versions of the law exist in over 20 states, giving police the power to act quickly when every second counts. The Smiths have spent more than a decade fighting to make it federal law, so no other family would ever have to endure the same nightmare. As Greg said, it would have saved 4 days of hunting, 4 days of not knowing if your child was alive. Kelsey Smith should have been 34 years old today. Her story isn't just about tragedy. It's about resilience, about a family who refused to let their daughter's death be meaningless. Because of them, countless lives may one day be saved. When Kelsey left for Target that evening, she hugged her father and said she loved him. Those were her last words. And though Greg and Missy will never get another chance to hear them, they've carried that love into everything they've done since. Evil stole their daughter's life, but it could not silence her voice. Through the law that bears her name, Kelsey Smith still speaks. If this case moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us bring more awareness to stories like these. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next true crime story we uncover. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.